Welcome to the Converged Security Centre here on the show floor at IFSEC 2023. I'm joined by James and Sarb. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, what is this? What is this Converged Security Centre? We're in front of a screen that's got lots of stuff going on. How do you describe what a CSC is in a nutshell, James?
Yes, well, it's like an operations centre or a control room where you're going to be sitting looking at events happening, cameras, access control systems. And what's different about the Converged Centre is it brings in also cyber attacks, so network attacks as well, so we can see what's going on and build up a joined up response to risk. So this is what the difference is. It's a matter of seeing cyber and physical attacks in one control centre.
And that makes a lot of sense to me, Sarb, because I cover cybersecurity issues quite a lot, but very often there's an element of physical attacks that take place in there as well. Whether it's someone tailgating as a lawful member of staff enters the building, or has somehow managed to gain entry as a tradesperson, has stuck a keylogger into the back of a PC or something. It makes absolute sense that you do bring these different areas of risk together.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it makes sense to you, me, and James, there are organisations and professions or roles that sometimes think, well, this is our domain, and it's politics within the profession. And the way I tend to look at it is, in terms of what James has just said about having a single view of risk, the way to look at it is if you think about any, if you look at any accident or anything that happens within the operating theatre, and there's that period that they call the golden hour, because if you get the patient right in that hour and you do the right things, there's a guaranteed chance that you're going to do the right things and they're going to be alive. The longer you go after the hour, the more problems you're going to get. Now, if you take that into cyber perspective or the converged perspective, when you have an instant that something goes wrong, if you've got the right experts there in front of you, and they can make the right decisions at the right time, you know that it's not going to cost you more. Instead of it being fixed within the next hour or 2 hours, you know it's not going to drag on for 2 or 3 days. And having the right people is what this is about. So,
with that in mind, having the right people in place, what does a CSC look like in practice? We've all got these visions, and I've worked in them as well, where you've got a few rows of desks. It's mission control, essentially, and you've got big screens on the front there that bring lots of feeds and different red, amber, green statuses and whatever else into one place. Is that how a CSC tends to look?
Well, that is exactly right, because if you might know, the US government, they've got an organisation called CISA, which is Cybersecurity Protection of the Critical National Infrastructure.
Right.
And they've actually identified NASA as a case study for security convergence. So they will have an operations centre like we have here, but much bigger scale, obviously fantastic. So that is the sort of golden number one example, and they even cite them as being, this is what you should do. And they're saying you must do security convergence as well, which is interesting because that's a document that came out at the end of last year from the US government, CISA. And they're citing NASA as an example.
Pretty authoritative source, one way or another.
Yeah, you don't get higher than that.
How have these centres, how has this convergence evolved over the last 5 years? We've seen technology move apace and, its impact on the physical security industry. Of course, cyber threats have evolved quite considerably and continue to evolve as well. So in terms of how that manifests itself as what a CSC looks like, what are you seeing?
That's a really good question. I think one comment I'll make first is that if you think about the way that the attackers work, because really what you're trying to do in the Converged Centre is deal with attackers.
Yes.
An attacker, group, individual, the way that they think is what you need to get into. An attacker, individual or group, they won't think to themselves, oh, do you know what? I need some physical security skills, or do you know what? I need some cyber skills. They just do what needs to be done. And because they do what needs to be done, the way that we defend has to be in a way where we need to do whatever we need to do to defend ourselves. And if we pigeonhole ourselves in a way that we exclude ourselves or include ourselves in the wrong way, that actually is going to be counter to the way the attacker's working. So it's very important that, first of all, we organise ourselves to be able to deal with whatever the attacker's going to throw at us. And that's really what they're trying to do. Yeah. So in terms of the way, your question of the last 5 years, technology has been converging for many, many years. But what's been exciting over the last 5 years is how many of these technologies are beginning to integrate with each other so that you're able to join the technologies together, get intelligence in the way that you want to do it, and make better decisions faster. Instead of, like, for example, earlier on we demonstrated here today a whole range of perimeter systems, a whole range of video surveillance systems and so on. The fact that you can get all the feeds together through integrated systems and have that view is fantastic. And the more of the integration we get, the better the CSC is going to become in the future. And at the moment, I would say we haven't even scratched the scratch, because yes, there's integration, but the way it's going to be far more integrated. We're going to get better at this, which is going to give the teams more opportunities to work together.
And working together, it's about collaboration at the end of the day, and goodness knows criminals collaborate. You know, that honor amongst thieves. If criminals want to do something and there's another group of criminals who, can help them do it, they won't have any bones about reaching out. But goodness knows, in industry, particularly competitive industries, whether it's you've got regulation that gets in the way, you've got competition that gets in the way, you've got we don't normally speak to them, so we're not going to speak to them about this thing, that whole public perception and corporate perception that gets in the way as well. But criminals don't tend to have any of that. So a use case, are there any practical examples of where we can see a CSC having made a real difference in terms of bringing together these loose threads across the physical and the digital cyber security realms?
Yes, well, I think I think we could go back to the IoT issue, Internet of Things security, around that, because that's what's causing the interest and the growth. So the concern about IoT security, the Internet of Things, and therefore, because buildings, we're looking at smart buildings, we've got lots of buildings using IoT. There are use cases where organisations have been targeted and brought down. So in Norway, there's an aluminium plant where their systems were turned down, and they had to go back to using paper. So that meant that even though they had all these systems working, there's an actual event where they had to go back to using paper for 3 or 4 days, and they couldn't access any of their systems. So in terms of an actual event, which they were targeted, and they did have a sort of joined up approach. Whether they had a control room like this is debatable, but there are large companies, I think we can name some like Apple and Microsoft and Google, those sort of large IT companies. They have these operation centres in place to manage attacks like we're seeing. They might not go on. And Microsoft has produced documentation about convergence and how they see the 70% less risk as a result of that. So they're on record for saying that. So there are these sort of well-known examples of benefits of convergence, and yet at the same time we recognise that not enough people are taking up this as a way forward. So we're acknowledging the fact, but at the same time there's a progress with the IoT security problem.
And of course, IoT security is something that's being spoken about an awful lot here with incoming legislation and so on, which is all a good thing. We haven't got time to cover that right now. But one thing, Sarb, that I just want to touch on before we go, and James, you mentioned it in terms of smart buildings and so on. Another hot topic of conversation here is Martin's Law. In the follow-up to what the tragic events in Manchester a few years ago now, and the new legislation that means that whether you are operating a public building or whatever else, there are things that you have to do now that will hopefully make it safer for the people who are visiting. Does this play into that? What's the Martin's Law angle on the Converged Security Centre, would you say?
Tomorrow we're doing a presentation which actually covers that
Okay.
in a bit more detail, because what Martin's Law is asking to be done could have been done with technology. And technology, I wouldn't say it's the be all and end all. Yes, I work in technology and I have done for a long time, but sure enough, the technology that we're talking about from a converged perspective actually does enable you to meet those things that Martin Law requires.
Yeah.
And really, if you look at it, we did cover a session today around open spaces, and what we were trying to do was cover those things that Martin's Law covers, and try and give an example of some of the technologies that are available, and they have been getting better for quite some time over that period of time. And whereas when the issue happened in Manchester a couple of years back, yes, the technologies were there, but the integration to benefit in the way that you can now wasn't necessarily there. So now is a good time to be able to respond to the law.
Very quickly, James.
And finally, because it's all about bringing in measures to reduce physical risk, isn't it, from the terrorist attack. And basically, if you're using CCTV and access controls and any other things that you can see in the show, the difference that the Convergence Centre can make is if it's a cyber secure system. So if those very systems you're using are protected, they're not going to be attacked and controlled by an attacker, then you can rest assured better that your cameras are actually pointing at the right place. They're not switched off by a terrorist who's got control from an online cyber attack. They've actually locked them down so that they can't be hacked, and that way you can be rest assured that you are, can protect your people. Because otherwise you could get any of these systems, but they could be controlled by somebody else. And even CPNI 10 years ago said you've got to do stuff around this. You've got to make sure that any camera system isn't controlled by somebody else. It's in your area, but you have to make sure that you're doing that. Once you've got your system, okay, you're going to take measures, but are they cyber secure or not?
Indeed.
So that's what we've got to also look at.
Yeah. So it's having the assurances. It's not just saying that you're doing it. It's being able to prove it by having the assurance saying, yes, we've checked it. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's a bit like that old backup problem. Oh yeah, we do backups. Have you tested them? No.
A backup isn't a backup until you've restored from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you need the assurance, and that's what we're talking about here. Having the assurance is what's going to make sure that it's actually working as it should be.
Well, listen, gents, we'll leave it there for now, but it's been great to converge here in the CSE theatre and chat to you about this. Lots more conversations to be had, and I hope for a lot more convergence in the next 12 months when we chat next. But for now, James Sarb, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.